Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Brainbean here again. Today we're going to be taking a look at two of the most popular tenkeyless keyboards on the market right now, the Razer Huntsman Tournament Edition against the Logitech G Pro X. So with that, let's go ahead and just dive right into the comparison. So starting with construction and design, both of these keyboards have a 92-key, 10-keyless design and are very similar in size, with the G Pro X coming in just a little bit longer by a few centimeters. The Huntsman has an exposed switch design with a matte finished metal top plate, while the G Pro X has a similar matte finish, but instead has a plastic top cover around the back plate and the switches. Now, just as a side note here, I did notice that plastic top cover actually kind of got in the way of my thumb when I was using the space bar. It wasn't enough to necessarily interfere with my gameplay, but it was definitely noticeable enough to distract me while I was playing. Both keyboards are solidly built and have a little bit of flex when really cranking down on the boards. I think it is worth mentioning that the G Pro X is noticeably heavier, but it also has a little bit more play when trying to twist and bend the board. Both boards have a pretty minimalistic design, although if you're looking for the cleaner board of the two, I'd have to give the edge to the Huntsman because it doesn't have any dedicated keys or LED indicators taking up space up top like the G Pro X does. Now, both keyboards have a little branding on them, with the G Pro X having the most obvious of the two with the expected RGB Logitech G logo in the top corner, while the Huntsman has some more underpronounced kind of stealthy Razer logo just above the arrow cluster. In terms of overall construction and design, I'd give the edge slightly to Razer here, but I would say that it's close enough that you can pretty much go with personal preference on this category. Both keyboards feature per-key RGB lighting, which are controlled by their respective softwares. The G Pro X technically has a little bit more RGB potential here with the RGB-enabled G logo and the light toggle button up top, but I'd say that they're mostly similar. Logitech's newer G-Hub software is a noticeable improvement over their previous offerings, but I'm not quite sure it's as polished as Razer's Synapse. That being said, the overall result should be the same, as they both let you create custom profiles with your own layouts, macros, and lighting effects. Both softwares offer the standard effects like wave, spectrum cycling, and reactive, and at the same time they both have their own unique effects as well. However, I would say Logitech's are a little bit more bland. Another big plus for Razer Synapse that's definitely worth mentioning is the growing list of partners that are being roped in to be included into the Synapse ecosystem. And what this does is give you a more cohesive experience so that now your Thermaltake fans or your MSI motherboards, for example, can all be controlled by Synapse in-game integration. So when you're playing games like Apex, Fortnite, Overwatch, Doom, or any of the other tons of titles that they're adding, can all be controlled there. G-Hub, on the other hand, has a really cool community element where you can create, share, and upvote different profiles, and their screen sampler feature lets your profiles mimic the on-screen colors in a selected area to give a more immersive lighting experience with anything that's on screen, from different video games to movies. Physically, the lights on the G Pro X do have a more vibrant and saturated look to the colors. However, you won't have any spillover across the keyboard because of that plastic top cover. It's certainly a more clean, defined RGB experience, while the Huntsman Tournament Edition has more muted colors that don't appear quite as bright because of the keycaps that it has, but we're going to talk more about those here in just a minute. What the Huntsman does have, though, is that ambient spillover effect, giving the keys a slight underglow effect. The keycaps on the G Pro X are made of ABS plastic, and they do have a nice clean font to them, and the keycaps are all fully illuminated and clearly defined. While the Huntsman has PBT keycaps with a nice clean and simple font, the Huntsman's keycaps certainly have a more premium feel to them, but they do sacrifice a bit on the permeation of the lighting, which makes the font look a little bit less clean than the G Pro X's. Now, under its keycaps, the Huntsman TKL has Razer's new optical linear switch, which is buttery smooth and rock solid thanks to the built-in stabilizers. They're super light and quick, but will almost certainly take some getting used to, and heavy-handed users or those prone to mistyping may have issues, as they have a super quick actuation point of 1mm and a featherlight actuation force of 40 grams. I also want to point out that the stabilizers on this board are awesome. There's no rattle or ping whatsoever, which adds to a really nice feeling of quality. Now, currently the Huntsman Tournament Edition is only offered in the linear optical switch, but they may add the Clicky variant sometime in the future. These switches are optical, which means that there's no metal contact points, which increases longevity, resulting in a 100 million key press lifespan. Now the G Pro on the other hand uses traditional mechanical switches available in one of 3 of the classic varieties: Clicky, linear, or tactile. The G Pro X uses Logitech's GX switch, which is basically just rebranded Kale switches. It actually still says Kale right on the switch itself. These have more standard specs with a more forgiving 2mm actuation distance and a 50-gram actuation force. The linear and the tactile switch have an actuation distance of 1.9mm if we want to get super nitpicky and technical, but it's safe to say that it's about twice the actuation distance on average than the Huntsman Tournament Edition switches, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. The cool thing about the G Pro X is that the switches are hot swappable, so you can swap out your switches with any compatible switches or mix and match if you want to, say, have linear switches on your W, A, S, and D keys and tactile on all the others. Another advantage here is being able to replace a failed switch without having to RMA the entire keyboard. Logitech sells the blue, brown, and red switch packs for $50, but you can use it with any compatible switches. I tested it with Hako, Clears, and Violets, and they work just fine. The stabilizers on the G Pro X are pretty good, but the spacebar is a little bit rattling. Of course, I wouldn't leave you guys without a sound test, so just for fun, here is a quick sound test between the 2 keyboards. Both keyboards have removable braided cables of the same length, and they both use their own proprietary connections to secure the cable. The Huntsman here I think has the edge because it uses a USB-C cable, but I am a fan of the 3-pronged cable design of the G Pro X. Now both boards have 2-step extendable legs, so you can position them at 3 different angles. Both of these legs are rubberized, but I would give the advantage here to the G Pro because they're a little bit wider. In terms of extras, there really isn't a whole lot coming from the Huntsman Tournament Edition. I mean, hell, they don't even give you a keycap puller. The G Pro X, on the other hand, does at least give you a switch and keycap puller, and of course includes the cable. And it does have a dedicated button for turning on and off the RGB and the Windows lock key, although I don't really see those as being essential dedicated keys. The G Pro X has the ability to program any one of the 12 F keys up top into dedicated macro keys, while the Huntsman uses Razer's Hypershift technology, which lets you program the entire keyboard as a secondary set of macro keys as long as you hold down the Hypershift button to activate them. I don't really particularly find either of these modes super convenient, but just keep those features in mind. So now that we've gone over all the specs, let's break this down. The Huntsman Tournament Edition is $129, while the G Pro X is a little bit more expensive at $150. I think the G Pro X is more aesthetically pleasing with the brighter, more vibrant colors, and the font looks a lot more full and nice to look at. The hot swappable switches are certainly nice to have, and they give you the ability to try new switch types without having to buy a whole new keyboard, and the software is pretty good. The Huntsman Tournament Edition uses what I would consider the better switch, although it is a little bit fast for my taste. The stabilizers are much better here too, and while the PBT keycaps don't look as nice, the RGB still achieves the desired effect, but the typing experience they provide is a noticeable upgrade. This comparison is close enough that I think a lot of it's going to come down to what you're looking for in a keyboard. My recommendation would be, if you want to pick up a keyboard as a one-time purchase and just get something that's going to last and offer you the most quality experience out of the box, then I'd go with the Huntsman. But if you want something that you can grow with and maybe make sort of a project keyboard, the G Pro X is a good option, as you can order different switches and not necessarily even Logitech switches, and you can swap out the keycaps too to get the higher quality PBT ones later, and maybe even work on the stabilizers if you want to. But in terms of overall value, when strictly looking at bang for your buck, I think the Huntsman Tournament Edition pulls ahead by a narrow margin.